Alright, so we have the new album by Jlin, Black Origami. This is her second record, and she's continuing down this footwork path towards a more consistent kind of sound than we saw on Dark Energy. So Black Origami is sort of a progression from Dark Energy, whereas Dark Energy was diverse and very all over the place with its structures and textures. Black Origami is a much more consistent record, and she uses different drum timbres and different textures as far as her beats go to instead give it diversity instead of having these wildly different sounding songs like we got on Dark Energy. Now that being said, I do think some of these songs play it a little bit safe. I think a little bit near the middle it starts to get very samey with these fast-paced drum beats sort of flowing in and out of each other, and although there are a lot of different drum timbres and different inspirations, I think from a lot of world music or Afrobeat with how these drums sound and what different percussion she's using, I think that it starts to blend together a little bit near the middle. I think a lot of her lighter songs on this album though, specifically Holy Child or the 1.5 minute interlude near the end of the album, really help to break up the flow and make it seem like a more dynamic record. Because Dark Energy was such a diverse and all over the place set of beats, I think this record is more of an exploration in texture and different drumming patterns, and while that is interesting, it didn't quite hold my attention as much as Dark Energy did. Now to name a few songs specifically, I think the opener Black Origami was a nice callback to the sort of orchestral elements on the opener Black Ballet of Dark Energy. I think that the different incorporations of some of these sounds that are found in traditional classical music really make this song seem dynamic and interesting, and it gives a good start to the record. But almost immediately after that we have the song Enigma, which is my number one gripe on this album, or features my number one gripe on this album, which is the vocal snippets. On Dark Energy she used these vocal samples very effectively to add a theme or a mood to each song. Here they feel like really cut up, kind of scattered samples that are used mostly as a replacement for a drum, and while I think that's an interesting idea, I think the execution comes off much more sloppy and almost like you're playing around in Logic. You just have a sample of some girl saying, and you just tap it 50 times, and although that could work on some songs, like they're not all the songs here have bad vocal samples, I think that specifically on Enigma, it really took me out of the mood of the song. As I mentioned before, one of my favorite tracks on the album was Calcination, which is the 1.5 minute interlude near the back half of the album. And I think it's really a shame because I thought it was one of the more interesting beats. I thought the vocal samples and the way she was working with atmosphere on this track was very ethereal and very all-absorbing. It really felt like she was creating a space for me to listen in. And I'm really sad that it only ended up being 1.5 minutes because I think these breaks from the fast-paced drumming and the sort of bombardment of sound and drums really helps this album breathe and feel like a more full experience instead of being something that is just a constant race. It's a sprint to the finish. So although this album is a decent follow-up to Dark Energy, I think it falls victim to too much attention on texture and feeling. I think they ignore dynamics and sort of structure that is a more interesting and varied variety on this album, and I think it suffers for that. But overall, it's a good listen. If you're very into footwork or some of these more contemporary producers today, I would definitely check out this album. And if you don't like it, make sure to check out Dark Energy, her previous album.